Hey guys, tonight we're taking a journey back in time, not to a serene, marble-laden paradise of philosophical debate and democratic ideals, but to the very heart of ancient Greek worship, their temples. We often picture these structures as pristine, awe-inspiring monuments to beauty and reason. But tonight, we're going to discover how ancient Greek temples were disturbing and more. You might imagine peaceful sanctuaries filled with quiet reverence, but trust me, after tonight, you'll probably see those majestic ruins in a very different light. A quick reality check. You, with your modern sensibilities and aversion to gore, probably wouldn't last a single morning near one of their major altars. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're feeling up to it, drop your location and local time in the comments. I'd love to see where everyone's tuning in from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You might envision ancient Greek temples as purely architectural masterpieces, serene and pristine, dedicated to quiet contemplation. And while their beauty is undeniable, when you step within their sacred precincts, you quickly realize that for the ancient Greeks, piety often involves something far more visceral and disturbing, more than marble blood and guts. Forget the gentle incense. The reality was a regular, messy, and often brutal display of animal sacrifice. Central to their worship, imagine yourself standing in the open-air courtyard in front of a grand temple. Perhaps the Parthenon in Athens, or the Temple of Zeus at Olympia. The air is thick with anticipation, the low murmur of prayers from the assembled crowd. You hear the bleating of sheep, the lowing of oxen, or the squealing of pigs being led towards the altar. These aren't just a few animals. For major festivals, hundreds, even thousands, could be sacrificed. This scale of ritualized slaughter is a common historical fact often overlooked when admiring the temples themselves. The centerpiece of this ritual is the altar, typically located outside the temple proper, beneath the open sky. This altar wouldn't be pristine white marble. It would be stained dark with the accumulated blood and ash of countless offerings. Imagine seeing the dark, almost black, crust built up over centuries, a testament to the continuous flow of life poured out in devotion. This visual detail alone is a stark departure from our sanitized view of ancient religious practices. The ritual itself was precise but undeniably gruesome. Priests clad in ceremonial robes would lead the chosen animal to the altar. The animal's head might be sprinkled with water, making it nod interpreted as consent to the sacrifice. Then, with a swift, practiced motion, the throat of the animal would be cut by a skilled butcher, or the priest himself. Imagine the sudden gush of warm, bright red blood pouring over the altar, sometimes collected in special bowls. You hear the animal's final, desperate breath, the thud as it collapses, the smell of fresh blood, mingled with the burning incense, what would immediately permeate the air, an overwhelming sensory experience. This was not hidden from view. It was a public spectacle, witnessed by men, women, and children, a fundamental part of their religious life. But the blood and guts didn't stop there. After the animal was killed, it was meticulously butchered. The entrails, or internal organs, were removed and carefully examined by diviners or priests in a practice known as extispicy. Imagine the priest's hands, delving into the warm, steaming innards, searching for omens, for cracks in the liver, or irregularities in the spleen that might reveal the will of the gods. You might catch a glimpse of the glistening organs, still connected by sinews, a stark, visceral image that lingers in your mind. This wasn't just about sacrifice, it was about seeking divine communication through a gruesome, yet sacred dissection. Then came the burning. The thigh bones, considered the god's share, were wrapped in fat, placed on the altar, and set ablaze. Imagine the thick, acrid smoke rising into the sky, carrying the essence of the offering to the Olympian deities. The smell of burning fat and meat would hang heavy in the air, a constant reminder of the ongoing ritual, The rest of the meat, after being roasted, was typically distributed among the worshippers, eaten communally. This wasn't just a feast, it was a shared meal with the gods, forging a direct physical connection. This pervasive practice of animal sacrifice means that Greek temples, far from being pristine, were often quite messy. The ground around the altars would be soaked with blood, bone fragments, and discarded animal parts. Flies would be drawn to the area, attracted by the decaying organic matter. Even the marble of the temples themselves, while not directly blood-stained, would absorb the smells from the constant rituals nearby. The philosophical implications of this blood and guts piety are also disturbing. It highlights a very different relationship with the divine than many modern religions. For the Greeks, the gods demanded a tangible, bloody offering, a direct exchange of life for favor. It was a raw, primal connection, steeped in ritual and the shedding of vital fluids, a stark contrast to the intellectual pursuits often associated with ancient Greece. Historians still debate the specific symbolic meaning and psychological impact of animal sacrifice on Greek worshippers, with some emphasizing the communal bonding aspect and others focusing on the inherent brutality. So, as you slowly succumb to the gentle pull of sleep, imagine the pervasive smell of blood and burning flesh, the cries of sacrificial animals, and the sight of priests delving into warm entrails, all set against the backdrop of those majestic marble temples. For all their architectural beauty, ancient Greek temples were fundamentally places of visceral, often disturbing, ritual, where piety was inextricably linked with blood and guts. Your quiet, clean place of worship today feels like an unimaginable sanctuary compared to the intense, messy reality of ancient Greek religious practice. You've just witnessed the visceral reality of animal sacrifice, understanding that ancient Greek temples were far from pristine. Now, let's talk about the less than pleasant sensory experience that pervaded these sacred spaces. The stench of piety rot and offal? Forget the sweet smell of flowers and clean air. The truth reveals a constant, overwhelming aroma of decaying organic matter, smoke, and general filth that clung to every part of the temple precincts. Imagine yourself still standing in the courtyard of a grand Greek temple, perhaps after a major sacrifice. The air, which you might expect to be pure and sacred, is instead thick with a truly nauseating mixture of smells. The most prominent is the pervasive odor of blood, not just fresh blood, but the drying, congealing blood that would have soaked into the ground around the altar. Imagine the metallic tang, mingled with a faint, cloying sweetness as it began to decay. This wouldn't be a fleeting smell, it would linger, especially in the heat, drawing flies and other insects. Then there's the distinct stench of burning flesh and fat. After a sacrifice, the thigh bones of the animal, wrapped in fat, were burned on the altar as an offering to the gods. Imagine the acrid, heavy smoke rising, carrying the smell of roasting meat and rendering fat. This smell, while perhaps considered sacred by the Greeks, would be overwhelming and intensely greasy. It would cling to your clothes, your hair, and permeate the very air you breathed within the temple precinct. This was a constant, almost ritualistic assault on your sense of smell. Beyond the immediate aftermath of sacrifice, there was the less savory reality of offal and discarded animal parts. While some portions of the animal were eaten by worshippers or consumed by the fire, not everything was meticulously cleaned away. Imagine the potential for discarded entrails, bone fragments, or other waste products to be left unattended, especially during large festivals with numerous sacrifices. These would quickly begin to decompose in the Mediterranean heat, producing a truly putrid odor of rot and decay, mingling with the other smells. The ground itself, soaked in blood and animal fluid, would be a source of persistent foulness. Consider also the presence of live animals awaiting sacrifice. Sheep, goats, oxen, their natural body odors, combined with their waste, would add to the overall miasma of the area. Imagine the smell of manure, the earthy scent of unwashed animal hide, all contributing to the pervasive, unappealing aroma of the temple grounds. This wasn't a sterile environment, it was a bustling, active religious center where animals were an integral part of the proceedings. And it wasn't just the sacrifices. The sheer number of people gathering for festivals and rituals would also contribute to the overall stench. Imagine thousands of unwashed bodies, sweating in the sun, mingling with the smells of stale breath, unwashed clothes, and general human effluvium. Personal hygiene, by modern standards, was rudimentary at best, ensuring that the human element added its own distinct flavor to the temple's pervasive aroma. Even the impressive marble structures themselves, while beautiful, would absorb these smells over time. Imagine standing near the gleaming white columns of a temple, only to catch a faint whiff of stale blood, burning fat, or animal waste clinging to the stone. The contrast between the visual beauty and the olfactory reality would be striking and unsettling. Historians still debate the specific methods of waste disposal and cleanliness maintained by temple staff, but it's clear that the sheer volume of organic matter from sacrifices made keeping the precincts truly clean a perpetual challenge. This constant assault on the senses meant that visiting an ancient Greek temple was a far cry from the serene, spiritual experience we might imagine. It was a visceral, often unpleasant encounter, where your nose was as engaged as your eyes, and the reality of ancient piety was undeniably profoundly smelly. The stench of piety was a constant companion, a testament to their deep physical connection with the divine, which involved literally spilling life and burning offerings. So, as you slowly succumb to the gentle pull of sleep, imagine the pervasive, cloying smell of drying blood, the acrid smoke of burning fat, and the faint yet undeniable odor of decaying offal that permeated the sacred spaces of ancient Greece. For all their architectural grandeur, Greek temples were places where the raw realities of sacrifice created a constant assault on the senses, making your clean, fresh-smelling home tonight feel like an unimaginable sanctuary. The beauty of the Parthenon often hid a truly pungent and disturbing truth. You've just experienced the pervasive, unsettling stench of piety, realizing that ancient Greek temples were far from just pleasant aesthetic experiences. Now, let's delve deeper into the hidden, often terrifying, side of Greek religious practice cults of fear, oracles, and madness. Forget the serene wisdom often attributed to ancient seers. The truth reveals unsettling rituals, intoxicating fumes, and profound psychological torment that could push the devout to the brink of delirium. Imagine yourself making a pilgrimage to a famous oracle, perhaps not the well-known Delphi just yet, but a lesser-known, perhaps more primal, site dedicated to a chthonic deity or a hero. You are seeking answers, desperate for guidance on a matter of life or death, a harvest, a battle, or a personal ailment. The atmosphere here is different from the open, bustling temple courtyards. It's darker, more hushed, imbued with a sense of ancient power and a palpable undertone of fear. The cult practices themselves often involved methods designed to induce altered states of consciousness, blurring the lines between reality and the divine. You might find yourself in a secluded, dimly lit chamber, perhaps a cave or a subterranean grotto, where the air is heavy with the scent of burning herbs. These herbs, while sometimes aromatic, could also be psychotropic, deliberately used to induce visions or trances. Imagine inhaling those strange, sweet, yet slightly acrid fumes, feeling your head grow light, your senses beginning to distort. This deliberate manipulation of perception is a truly disturbing detail. Consider the role of the oracle themselves. These were often women, chosen for their purity or specific qualities, who would serve as conduits for the gods' messages. But the process of channeling the divine was far from passive. In some cults, the oracle might engage in intense fasting, sleep deprivation, or exposure to extreme conditions, deliberately pushing their body and mind to breaking point. Imagine witnessing a figure writhing, convulsing, or speaking in a frenzied, unintelligible babble, believed to be the god's voice speaking through them. The sight would be terrifying, almost certainly unsettling, and perhaps even induce a sympathetic state of fear in you. The observer. Historians still debate the specific methods used to induce trance states in various oracles, ranging from psychological suggestion to actual hallucinogenic substances or gases. The messages received from these oracles were rarely straightforward. They were often cryptic, ambiguous, or even terrifyingly direct. Imagine asking for guidance on a battle only to receive a prophecy of inevitable defeat and mass slaughter, or seeking a cure for an illness, only to be told of impending death. The burden of interpreting these often dire pronouncements, and the psychological weight of knowing your fate, would be immense. You leave not with comfort, but with a profound sense of dread, burdened by knowledge that offers little solace. Then there were the more intense, often secret, mystery cults that thrived on the fringes of mainstream religion, often with disturbing initiatory rituals. While some, like the Eleusinian mysteries, were generally revered, even they involved elements designed to shock and disorient initiates, simulating death and rebirth through darkness, strange sound, and frightening imagery. Imagine being led through a maze of dark tunnels, suddenly exposed to blinding flashes of light, or hearing disembodied voices, all designed to break down your rational defenses and open your mind to a profound, often terrifying spiritual experience. The idea was to achieve epopteia, a direct vision of the sacred, but the path to it was often paved with fear and psychological manipulation. Some cults of fear were associated with darker deities, or practices that verged on the taboo. Think of cults dedicated to Hecate, the goddess of magic, witchcraft, and ghosts. Her worship might involve nocturnal rites in remote locations, offerings of dogs or black lambs, and the invocation of spirits from the underworld. Imagine participating in such a ritual, surrounded by shadows, chanting incantations, attempting to commune with the dead or to harness dark magical forces. The atmosphere would be one of profound unease, tapping into primal fears of the supernatural. The fine line between religious ecstasy and genuine madness was often blurred. Individuals who experienced profound visions or prophetic trances might, to an outside observer, appear to be suffering from mental illness in a society that lacked a scientific understanding of mental health. These individuals might be revered as divinely touched or feared as possessed. Imagine witnessing someone experiencing a public religious frenzy, their body contorting, their words nonsensical, and knowing that this was considered a manifestation of the divine rather than a medical condition. This element of fear was deeply ingrained. The Greeks believed that offending the gods could lead to terrible misfortunes, madness, or divine retribution. These cults of fear, with their intense rituals and direct, often disturbing, messages from the divine, served as a constant reminder of the gods' immense power and the precariousness of human existence in the face of it. They tapped into the deepest anxieties of the human psyche, offering a path to power or understanding, but at a potentially devastating personal cost. Historians still debate the precise sociological function of these cults of fear in ancient Greece, with some arguing they provided a necessary outlet for emotional release, while others emphasize their manipulative and controlling aspects. So, as you slowly succumb to the gentle pull of sleep, imagine the intoxicating fumes, the terrifying visions, and the profound psychological manipulation that defined these cults of fear. For all the glory of Greek philosophy, their religious life often plunged individuals into realms of madness and despair in the quest for divine knowledge. Your calm, rational understanding of the world tonight feels like an unimaginable sanctuary compared to the unsettling reality of ancient Greek oracles and cults. You've just experienced the disturbing rituals and psychological tolls of ancient Greek cults and oracles. Now, let's explore another unsettling aspect of their religious landscape: dark offerings and curses. Forget simple prayers and pious gifts. The truth reveals a world where people dedicated grim objects, laid potent curses, and sought to manipulate the divine for malevolent purposes. even within sacred spaces. Imagine yourself in a secluded corner of a temple precinct, perhaps not in the grand sanctuary, but near a chthonic shrine dedicated to underworld deities, or a sacred well. The atmosphere here is different. It feels heavier, perhaps a little sinister. You might notice small, unassuming objects left as offerings, but these are not the gleaming golden statues or beautiful ceramics found in the main temple. These are dark offerings, often mundane items imbued with sinister intent. Consider the common practice of curse tablets or defixiones. These were small sheets of lead, thin and flexible, upon which a person would scratch a curse against an enemy. Imagine holding one in your hand, a small, dark piece of metal, intricately inscribed with tiny, vengeful words. These curses weren't just angry thoughts. They were formal petitions to powerful underworld gods and spirits, Hades, Persephone, Hecate, or nameless chthonic deities, demanding that they inflict harm upon a rival. You might find a curse tablet aimed at a competitor in a chariot race, asking for their horses to stumble or their chariot to break. Or perhaps a scorned lover seeking to bind their rival's tongue, making them unable to speak clearly in court or win arguments. Some were even more direct, wishing for physical harm, illness, or professional ruin upon an enemy. Imagine the chilling precision of the language, designed to ensure the curse found its mark. The target's name would be included, often with their mother's name to identify them unmistakably. The truly disturbing detail is where these curses were placed. They were often rolled or folded up, sometimes pierced with a nail, a symbolic act of binding the victim, and then deposited in places believed to be conduits to the underworld. Imagine burying a curse tablet in a grave, allowing the spirit of the deceased to carry it to the realm of the dead and deliver it to the infernal powers, or throwing it into a sacred well or spring, a portal to the watery underworld. They might even be nailed to the walls of a temple dedicated to appropriate deities, like those associated with the underworld or justice. The sheer number of these tablets found, thousands across the Greek world, attest to a pervasive undercurrent of malice and a reliance on dark magic to settle scores. This highlights a fascinating historical fact about the darker side of Greek religiosity. Beyond curse tablets, other dark offerings were made. Imagine small, crude figurines, perhaps made of lead or wax, depicting an enemy with their limbs bound or pierced with pins, symbolically enacting the harm wished upon them. These voodoo-like dolls were a tangible representation of malevolent intent, dedicated to deities who could bring about suffering. You might see a small lead binding doll buried near a temple, its purpose grimly clear. There were also offerings to deities associated with death and the underworld that might seem disturbing to modern eyes. Imagine placing offerings of black animals like black lambs or chickens, or even personal items, in dark pits or chasms, believing this would appease the chthonic gods or gain their malevolent favor. These rituals were often performed at night, in secret, far from the public gaze, reinforcing their association with the forbidden and the dangerous. The line between acceptable religious practice and outright sorcery was often blurred in ancient Greece. While the state-sponsored cults focused on public well-being, personal magical practices, including the laying of curses, existed in parallel. The fear of being cursed, or the desire to inflict harm through magical means, was a powerful force in daily life. Imagine the paranoia of knowing that an enemy might be secretly placing a curse on you, attempting to sabotage your life through unseen, supernatural forces. This pervasive belief in curses also led to various protective charms and counterspells. You might wear an amulet, carry a specific herb, or perform a small ritual yourself, hoping to ward off the malevolent magic of others. This constant battle against unseen magical threats added another layer of anxiety to an already precarious existence. Historians still vigorously debate the true psychological impact of these curses. Did the belief in them cause genuine suffering or even death among the cursed? Or were they merely a superstitious outlet for intense emotions in a form of magical thinking? Regardless, their presence speaks volumes about the fears and beliefs of the time. So, as you slowly succumb to the gentle pull of sleep, imagine the dark glint of a lead tablet, the chilling words scratched upon it, and the hidden places where malevolent wishes were offered to the gods. For all the grandeur of their temples, ancient Greek piety had a deeply disturbing underside of dark offerings and curses, revealing a society where the quest for divine power could often be twisted for revenge and personal harm. Your safe, uncursed bed tonight feels like an unimaginable sanctuary compared to the constant threat of unseen malice in the ancient world. You've just explored the disturbing realm of dark offerings and curses, realizing that ancient Greek piety had a sinister undercurrent. Now, prepare yourself for what happened when those divine powers were truly offended, or when ritual protocols were breached. Divine vengeance, miasma, and punishment. Forget the idea of forgiving gods. The truth reveals a terrifying belief in ritual pollution, and the gods' brutal, often collective, retribution that could devastate individuals and entire communities. Imagine you are an ancient Greek citizen, and a terrible event has occurred in your city. Perhaps a murder has been committed, a temple defiled, or a grave desecrated. This isn't just a crime against human law, it's believed to have caused miasma, or ritual pollution. This wasn't merely a bad smell or dirt, it was a spiritual taint, an invisible defilement that clung to the perpetrator, their family, and, crucially, to the entire community. Imagine the chilling fear that grips the city as whispers of miasma spread. This belief in collective guilt and pollution is a common historical fact that profoundly impacted Greek society. The fear stems from the understanding that an unpurified miasma could incur divine vengeance. The gods, easily angered and incredibly powerful, might respond to this pollution with devastating punishments. Imagine the terrifying possibilities of sudden plague sweeping through the city, crops failing, earthquakes shaking the ground, or military defeats. You'd see these misfortunes not as natural disasters, but as direct signs of the gods' wrath, a terrifying consequence of the community's spiritual impurity. This immediate and brutal connection between transgression and divine punishment is a truly disturbing detail. The response to miasma was desperate. The community would feel immense pressure to identify the source of the pollution and purify themselves. This often involved exile or execution of the perceived polluter. Imagine a man, perhaps innocent, being accused of a crime that brought miasma upon the city. He might be ostracized, driven from his home, or even condemned to death, not just for the act itself, but for the spiritual danger he represented to everyone. The urgency was absolute, driven by the terrifying fear of collective doom. A particularly unsettling example of divine vengeance through miasma is the story of the Alcmeonidae curse in Athens. This was a prominent aristocratic family who, centuries earlier, had massacred the followers of Cylon, who had attempted a coup and sought sanctuary at the altar of Athena. This act of sacrilege was believed to have caused a hereditary miasma that afflicted the family for generations. Imagine the fear of being born into a family tainted by such an ancient curse. Knowing that misfortune or divine disfavor might strike you at any moment, simply because of the actions of your ancestors. Even influential figures like Pericles, centuries later, faced political attacks by opponents who claimed he was tainted by the Alcmeonidae miasma. Historians still debate the extent to which the belief in hereditary miasma genuinely influenced political and social life in classical Athens, versus being used as a political weapon. Beyond the grand scale of miasma, individuals also feared direct divine punishment for personal offenses. Imagine neglecting your vows to a god, committing a sacrilegious act, or breaking an oath. The consequences could be terrifyingly personal sudden illness, madness, financial ruin, or the death of loved ones. The gods were believed to be omnipresent, constantly watching, and quick to punish perceived slights. This constant vigilance against offending the divine added a layer of anxiety to daily life. The rituals of purification were themselves often intense and fear-inducing. Imagine participating in a solemn ceremony, perhaps involving the sprinkling of blood, the burning of specific herbs, or the chanting of ancient prayers, all designed to cleanse the community of its spiritual taint. You'd feel the weight of collective guilt, the desperate hope that these rituals would appease the angry gods and avert further disaster. These were not joyous celebrations, but somber, urgent acts of appeasement. Sometimes, the gods' vengeance could be interpreted through omens and prophecies. A particularly bad omen, like an unexpected eclipse or a strange birth, might be seen as a warning of impending divine wrath. Oracles, as we discussed, might deliver terrifying prophecies of doom if the miasma was not cleansed. Imagine the collective panic when such a prophecy was announced, spurring the community into desperate action to identify and purify the source of the gods' displeasure. The terrifying power of divine vengeance meant that the Greeks lived in a world where misfortune was often attributed to a specific religious failing. This could lead to a constant search for blame, scapegoating, and profound anxiety. It highlights a relationship with the divine that was based as much on fear and appeasement as it was on reverence and love. So, as you slowly succumb to the gentle pull of sleep, imagine the chilling fear of miasma, the terrifying signs of divine vengeance in plague or famine, and the desperate acts of purification to appease angry gods. For all their pursuit of reason and philosophy, ancient Greeks lived under the constant shadow of a brutal, unforgiving divine justice, where the gods' punishment was a horrifying but a collective reality. Your modern understanding of natural disasters and illness feels like an unimaginable comfort compared to the pervasive dread of divine retribution in ancient Greece. You've just experienced the terrifying belief in miasma and the brutal reality of divine vengeance, a chilling insight into ancient Greek religious fear. Now, let's confront perhaps the most disturbing and hotly debated aspect of their offerings: human sacrifice, whispers, and reality. Forget the noble, out-philosophical Greeks for a moment. The truth reveals chilling hints, pervasive myths, and ongoing academic arguments about the extent to which the ultimate offering, a human life, might have been part of their past or even present religious practices. Imagine yourself in ancient Greece, hearing whispers of a time, or a place, where blood flowed from a human instead of an animal on an altar. While widespread human sacrifice was largely condemned and absent in classical Greek society, the Greece of Plato, Pericles, and the Parthenon, the echoes and myths of it were deeply ingrained, a disturbing undertone to their sophisticated civilization. A common historical fact is that in Greek mythology, stories of human sacrifice abound. Think of Iphigenia, daughter of King Agamemnon, sacrificed by her own father to appease the goddess Artemis and ensure favorable winds for the Greek fleet sailing to Troy. Imagine the chilling scene: a young maiden, innocent and pure, led to an altar, her life offered up for military success. This myth, deeply embedded in Greek consciousness, suggests a societal memory or understanding that such ultimate offerings, however abhorrent, were at least conceivable. Then there's the myth of King Erechtheus of Athens, who sacrificed his daughters to save his city from invasion, or the recurring motif of heroes sacrificing their loved ones for the greater good. These myths, while not direct historical accounts, reflect a cultural awareness of human sacrifice as a concept, a desperate measure when all other appeals to the gods had failed. They pose a haunting question: did these myths originate from actual past practices, however rare? Or were they purely literary inventions to explore themes of ultimate piety and despair? Historians still hotly debate whether the prevalence of human sacrifice in Greek myth reflects a distant historical reality, or primarily serves as a narrative device to explore extreme moral dilemmas and the demands of the gods. Beyond myth, there are scattered, unsettling hints in historical records and archaeological finds that fuel this debate. Consider the practice of pharmakos. This was a ritual, particularly in times of plague or crisis, where an undesirable member of the community, often a criminal, a physically deformed person, or someone of low status, was ritually beaten, driven out, or, according to some interpretations, even killed, as a scapegoat to cleanse the city of pollution. Imagine a terrified individual, publicly humiliated and physically abused, perhaps even hurled into the sea, bearing the collective sins and misfortunes of the community. While many scholars argue the pharmakos was expelled rather than killed in classical times, the underlying concept of sacrificing a human for the collective good is undeniably disturbing. Archaeological discoveries occasionally stir the pot of this debate. For instance, on the island of Crete, at the Minoan site of Anamospilia, archaeologists discovered human remains in a position that suggested ritual sacrifice, possibly during an earthquake. While the interpretation is controversial and heavily debated, such finds, however isolated, keep the question alive: could human sacrifice, even if rare, have been a grim reality in specific circumstances or in earlier, more archaic periods? Imagine the chilling implications of discovering such a site, forcing a reevaluation of our idealized image of the Greeks. Another disturbing whisper comes from accounts of certain cults or extreme situations. While not mainstream, some historical texts allude to instances where desperate communities, facing famine or military defeat, resorted to extreme measures. While these accounts are often presented with horror by the Greek writers themselves, their very existence suggests that the concept, however abhorrent, was not entirely alien. Imagine a community driven to such desperation that they would consider the ultimate sacrifice to appease angry gods. The very condemnation of human sacrifice in later classical Greek writings, like those of Herodotus or Plato, also indirectly suggests its former presence or the lingering memory of it. Why condemn something so vehemently if it never existed or was never even considered? This condemnation served to mark classical Greek civilization as distinct from barbarian cultures, which were often depicted as practicing human sacrifice. Ultimately, the question of human sacrifice in ancient Greece remains shrouded in mystery and academic debate. While it was not a pervasive, state-sanctioned practice in the classical period, the powerful myths, the unsettling rituals like the pharmakos, and the occasional archaeological hints create a disturbing backdrop to their seemingly rational and enlightened civilization. It forces you to confront the uncomfortable possibility that even the founders of Western thought might have, at times, faced or engaged in the ultimate, most horrifying form of offering. So, as you slowly succumb to the gentle pull of sleep, imagine the chilling whispers of human sacrifice in ancient Greece, the desperate choices, and the lingering questions about how far their piety might have truly extended. Your comfortable, humane world tonight feels like an unimaginable haven compared to the disturbing shadow of ultimate offerings in their distant past. You've just witnessed the terrifying chaos and brutality of a medieval battlefield, a place where survival was a grim lottery. Now, steel yourself, because we are stepping onto the ultimate crucible of their existence, the battlefield horror's chaos and cruelty. Forget the orderly lines and noble duels often romanticized. The truth of medieval combat was a terrifying, disorganized, and utterly brutal maelstrom where death was agonizing. And mercy was a foreign concept. Imagine yourself as a soldier, standing on the battlefield, awaiting the command to charge. The air is thick with tension, a mix of fear and adrenaline. You hear the deep rumble of thousands of feet, the occasional nervous cough, and the distant, unsettling sounds of the enemy army. Your armor, which we discussed was heavy and cumbersome, feels like a suffocating shell. Your heart pounds in your chest, a frantic drumbeat against the impending chaos. This isn't a quick, decisive engagement. It's a terrifying plunge into a swirling, bloody abyss. The moment the two lines clash is one of overwhelming sensory assault. You hear the deafening roar of thousands of men, a primal scream that echoes across the field. Then comes the horrific clash of steel on steel, the sickening thud of weapons on flesh and bone. The air is filled with the desperate screams of the wounded, the terrified whinnies of horses, and the guttural cries of men fighting for their lives. Dust, kicked up by countless feet, quickly obscures visibility, turning the battlefield into a suffocating, gritty haze. You can barely see the enemy in front of you, relying on instinct and the press of your comrades. Combat itself was chaotic and personal. This wasn't about strategic maneuvers from a distance for most soldiers. It was about raw, desperate, hand-to-hand fighting. Imagine thrusting your spear, swinging your axe, or parrying with your shield. Your muscles screaming with exertion. Every blow is meant to kill or maim. You're not just fighting an enemy soldier, you're fighting for your very survival against a determined, equally terrified opponent who wants to end your life. The fighting was often so close and intense that distinguishing friend from foe could be difficult in the swirling melee. A common historical fact is that medieval battles often quickly devolved into a series of individual duels and melees, rather than maintaining strict formations. The wounds inflicted were horrifying. Medieval weapons, axes, maces, swords, spears, were designed for maximum blunt force trauma and tearing flesh, not clean cuts. Imagine seeing a man struck by an axe bone shattered, flesh torn open, blood gushing forth. A blow from a mace could leave a limb useless, even if it didn't break the skin. Arrows, if not immediately fatal, could lodge deep in flesh, causing agonizing, infected wounds that slowly killed a soldier days or weeks after the battle. You'd witness men dismembered, eviscerated, or lying in pools of their own blood, their dying groans adding to the horrific symphony of the battlefield. The smell of fresh blood, mingled with sweat, fear, and the stench of disembowelment, would be overwhelming. Mercy was rare, especially for common soldiers. There were no Geneva Conventions. If you fell wounded, you were often finished off by an enemy looking for quick spoils, or simply to ensure you wouldn't rejoin the fight. Imagine being struck down, helpless on the ground, seeing an enemy approach, their face grim, their weapon raised for the final blow. The only hope was a quick death, often preferable to a slow, agonizing demise from an infected wound. Historians still debate the extent of mercy and ransom practices for common soldiers versus knights, noting that while high-value captives might be ransomed, most foot soldiers could expect little quarter. Beyond the initial clash, there was the terror of the rout. If your side broke and fled, the real slaughter often began. Imagine turning your back and running, your heavy armor slowing you down, as enemy cavalry relentlessly pursue, cutting down fleeing soldiers from behind. Panic would be absolute, turning men into desperate, scrambling prey. You'd witness massacres as retreating soldiers were butchered without mercy, their bodies left strewn across the countryside. And even if you survived the battle, the aftermath was grim. You'd likely be covered in blood, mud, and the grim evidence of death. The battlefield would be a sprawling charnel house, filled with the dead and the desperately wounded, their cries echoing in the eerie silence that followed the storm of combat. Searching for your friends among the fallen, or tending to your own wounds with rudimentary first aid, would be a horrifying and soul-numbing experience. The psychological trauma of witnessing such widespread death and suffering would undoubtedly haunt you for the rest of your life. The concept of a fair fight was often non-existent. Ambushes, feigned retreats, and other cunning tactics were employed. You could be fighting valiantly, only to be overwhelmed by a surprise flanking maneuver, or find yourself trapped in a bog or a narrow pass. Victory often went to the more cunning, or simply the luckier side, rather than the more honorable one. So, as you slowly succumb to the gentle pull of sleep, imagine the deafening roar, the sickening clash of steel, the horrifying wounds, and the utter chaos that defined a medieval battlefield. For all the tales of chivalry, the truth of combat was a brutal, dehumanizing experience, where survival was a matter of luck as much as skill, and death was often agonizing and undignified. Your peaceful, safe bed tonight is an unimaginable sanctuary compared to the horrifying reality of a medieval soldier's battle for survival. You've just witnessed the terrifying chaos and brutality of a medieval battlefield, a place where survival was a grim lottery. Now, let's talk about what often happened after the battle, or when a soldier's luck ran out: capture, ransom, and cruel imprisonment. Forget the chivalrous notions of fair treatment for prisoners. The truth for most medieval soldiers, particularly commoners, was a horrifying uncertainty, often leading to torture, forced labor, or a slow, miserable death in squalid conditions. Imagine you are a soldier, unlucky enough to be captured by the enemy. Perhaps you were wounded and couldn't flee, or simply overwhelmed in the chaos of a rout. The immediate moment of capture is terrifying. You're disarmed, your hands are bound, and you're probably pushed and shoved roughly by your captors. You might expect immediate death, but sometimes a captor might spare your life. Not out of mercy, but out of a calculated hope for profit. For knights and nobles, there was often the possibility of ransom. Imagine yourself a high-value prisoner, perhaps wealthy enough to be worth more alive than dead. You'd be held for ransom, sometimes for months or even years. While negotiations took place between your captors and your family or lord, while this offered a chance of survival, it wasn't a comfortable experience. You'd be held in a castle dungeon, often cold, damp, and dimly lit. Your diet would be meager, your clothing sparse, and your daily life one of profound boredom and uncertainty. Imagine the psychological toll of not knowing if your ransom would ever be paid, if your family cared enough, or if you'd rot away in captivity. The threat of torture or mutilation could be used to pressure your family into paying. A common historical fact is that ransom became a major economic driver in medieval warfare, especially for the nobility, but for the vast majority of common soldiers and peasants captured in battle, the reality was far grimmer. You had no wealth, no family able to pay a ransom. Your life had little monetary value to your captors. You might be summarily executed on the spot, as a means of reducing potential future threats or simply out of battlefield rage. Imagine seeing dozens of your comrades being cut down after surrendering, knowing your turn could be next. If you weren't immediately killed, you would likely face a life of forced labor or slavery. Captured common soldiers would be put to work in the fields, digging ditches, carrying supplies, or performing other arduous tasks for their new masters. Imagine the indignity of laboring for your former enemies, under constant supervision, with the threat of severe punishment for any transgression. Your food would be scraps, your shelter minimal, and your body would ache from endless toil. This was a brutal form of subjugation, turning former warriors into disposable chattel. Historians still debate the precise legal status of captured common soldiers in various medieval periods, but it's clear their fate was generally bleak and often indistinguishable from slavery. Then there was the nightmare of imprisonment in medieval dungeons. These were not the relatively humane prisons of today. They were often dark, dank, subterranean cells designed for security and punishment, not rehabilitation. Imagine being thrown into a cramped stone pit with no light, no ventilation, and a pervasive smell of stale urine and excrement. Rats and vermin would be your constant companions. Food would be sparse and often contaminated. Disease, as we've discussed, would be rampant, and you'd likely share your cell with others, spreading illness rapidly. You'd slowly waste away from malnutrition, cold, and sickness, your body weakening, your mind perhaps succumbing to madness from the isolation and sensory deprivation. Torture was also a grim reality, often used to extract information, force confessions, or simply to break the spirit of recalcitrant prisoners. Imagine being stretched on a rack, having your limbs dislocated, or being subjected to other agonizing methods of interrogation. The screams of others, or your own, echoing in the cold stone chambers, would be a constant testament to the horrors within. There were no human rights for prisoners of war. Their fate was entirely at the whim of their captors. Even if you managed to escape, your chances of survival were slim. You'd be deep in enemy territory, without food, shelter, or proper clothing, constantly hunted. And if you made it back to your own lines, you might face suspicion or even punishment for desertion or cowardice. So, as you slowly succumb to the gentle pull of sleep, imagine the terror of capture, the agonizing wait for ransom that might never come, and the brutal reality of forced labor or squalid imprisonment. For a medieval soldier, being taken alive often meant a descent into a nightmare of suffering, far removed from the glory of battle. Your freedom and security tonight are an unimaginable luxury compared to the constant threat of capture and the cruelties that awaited prisoners in the medieval world. You've just been subjected to the terrifying ordeal of capture and imprisonment, a grim reality for many medieval soldiers. Now, let's talk about the lasting consequences of such a brutal existence. The permanent marks left on both body and mind, the scars of war. A miserable end. Forget the idea of retiring peacefully to a quiet life. The truth is that medieval soldiers who survived often faced a future of chronic pain, psychological trauma, and societal neglect, leading to a bleak and undignified end. Imagine you are a veteran medieval soldier. You've survived countless battles, endured grueling marches, and perhaps even escaped captivity. You've lived a life that few could fathom, yet your return to normalcy is far from glorious. Your body, even if seemingly intact, is a roadmap of past torments. You likely suffer from chronic pain. Imagine a dull ache in your joints from years of carrying heavy armor and marching over uneven terrain. Your back constantly screams from spinal compression, a direct result of relentless physical exertion from a young age. Old wounds, even those that healed, would constantly throb, especially in damp or cold weather. A poorly set bone from a past injury might cause a permanent limp, or a sword cut to the arm might limit your range of motion. You are, in essence, a living testament to the physical toll of continuous warfare, your body perpetually reminding you of its brutal past. Beyond the visible wounds and constant aches, there's the pervasive issue of psychological trauma. While not understood in modern terms like PTSD, medieval soldiers undoubtedly suffered from it. Imagine being haunted by the sights and sounds of the battlefield, the screams of the dying, the smell of blood and burning flesh, the faces of enemies you killed, and comrades you watched fall. You might experience nightmares, waking in a cold sweat, reliving the chaos. During the day, you might be easily startled by loud noises, struggle to connect with loved ones, or find yourself quick to anger or despair. There was no counseling, no therapy, no support groups. You were simply expected to get over it. This invisible yet deeply debilitating wound would continue to fester, often leading to social isolation and profound emotional suffering. Historians still debate the specific manifestations and societal recognition of psychological trauma among medieval soldiers, but the evidence of its impact is clear in various historical accounts and literary works. For many veterans, the future was bleak, often involving poverty and neglect. There were no widespread pension systems or government benefits for disabled soldiers. If you couldn't work your land due to injury, or if your fighting days were over, you might find yourself reduced to begging, relying on the charity of others, or returning to your village as a burden on your family. Imagine standing by the roadside, your armor exchanged for rags, holding out a hand for charity, relying on the goodwill of strangers. The glory of your past battles would mean little in the face of gnawing hunger and destitution. Your family, if you had one, might struggle to support you, becoming another burden on their already meager resources. Even if you managed to secure a place in a lord's household, perhaps as a guard or retainer, your life would still be one of subservience, with your past glories quickly fading in the memories of others. You might recount tales of your battles, but they would often fall on deaf ears, overshadowed by the immediate concerns of daily life in the castle. Then there was the early death that often awaited them. While some might survive to old age, the cumulative effects of chronic pain, untreated infections, lingering diseases, remember the constant presence of dysentery and fevers on campaign, and the occasional relapse of old injuries meant that even veteran soldiers rarely enjoyed a long, healthy retirement. Your body, worn out by years of abuse, would simply give out, succumbing to an illness that a healthier individual might have overcome. The end was often not quick or dignified, but a slow, painful decline. This common reality of a shorter lifespan and premature death is a grim but well-established historical fact for medieval commoners, including soldiers, and for those who had committed particularly brutal acts in war or who had survived through morally ambiguous means. There might be a deep sense of guilt or moral injury. Imagine the burden of living with the memories of atrocities committed, the lives taken, the destruction wrought. This internal conflict in a deeply religious society that emphasized sin and redemption would add another layer of spiritual torment to their already burdened lives. With only the church offering a path to absolution, often at a steep price. So, as you slowly succumb to the gentle pull of sleep, imagine the constant pain, the haunting memories, the grinding poverty, and the pervasive sense of neglect that define the miserable end of a medieval soldier. For all their bravery and sacrifice, their lives were ultimately consumed by the brutal realities of war, leaving them with little but suffering and an undignified decline. Your comfortable, secure, and healthy retirement today, with access to medical care and social support, is an unimaginable paradise compared to the bleak reality that awaited many who served on the battlefields of the Middle Ages. You've just been subjected to the terrifying ordeal of capture and imprisonment, a grim reality for many medieval soldiers. Now, let's talk about the lasting consequences of such a brutal existence. The permanent marks left on both body and mind, the scars of war. A miserable end. Forget the idea of retiring peacefully to a quiet life. The truth is that medieval soldiers who survived often faced a future of chronic pain, psychological trauma, and societal neglect, leading to a bleak and undignified end. Imagine you are a veteran medieval soldier. You've survived countless battles, endured grueling marches, and perhaps even escaped captivity. You've lived a life that few could fathom, yet your return to normalcy is far from glorious. Your body, even if seemingly intact, is a roadmap of past torments. You likely suffer from chronic pain. Imagine a dull ache in your joints from years of carrying heavy armor and marching over uneven terrain. Your back constantly screams from spinal compression, a direct result of relentless physical exertion from a young age. Old wounds, even those that healed, one would constantly throb, especially in damp or cold weather. A poorly set bone from a past injury might cause a permanent limp, or a sword cut to the arm might limit your range of motion. You are, in essence, a living testament to the physical toll of continuous warfare, your body perpetually reminding you of its brutal past. Beyond the visible wounds and constant aches, there's the pervasive issue of psychological trauma. While not understood in modern terms like PTSD, medieval soldiers undoubtedly suffered from it. Imagine being haunted by the sights and sounds of the battlefield, the screams of the dying, the smell of blood and burning flesh, the faces of enemies you killed, and comrades you watched fall. You might experience nightmares, waking in a cold sweat, reliving the chaos. During the day, you might be easily startled by loud noises, struggle to connect with loved ones, or find yourself quick to anger or despair. There was no counseling, no therapy, no support groups. You were simply expected to get over it. This invisible yet deeply debilitating wound would continue to fester, often leading to social isolation and profound emotional suffering. Historians still debate the specific manifestations and societal recognition of psychological trauma among medieval soldiers, but the evidence of its impact is clear in various historical accounts and literary works. For many veterans, the future was bleak, often involving poverty and neglect. There were no widespread pension systems or government benefits for disabled soldiers. If you couldn't work your land due to injury, or if your fighting days were over, you might find yourself reduced to begging, relying on the charity of others, or returning to your village as a burden on your family. Imagine standing by the roadside, your armor exchanged for rags, holding out a hand for charity, relying on the goodwill of strangers. The glory of your past battles would mean little in the face of gnawing hunger and destitution. Your family, if you had one, might struggle to support you, becoming another burden on their already meager resources. Even if you manage to secure a place in a lord's household, perhaps as a guard or retainer, your life would still be one of subservience, with your past glories quickly fading in the memories of others. You might recount tales of your battles, but they would often fall on deaf ears, overshadowed by the immediate concerns of daily life in the castle. Then there was the early death that often awaited them. While some might survive to old age, the cumulative effects of chronic pain, untreated infections, lingering diseases, remember the constant presence of dysentery and fevers on campaign, and the occasional relapse of old injuries meant that even veteran soldiers rarely enjoyed a long, healthy retirement. Your body, worn out by years of abuse, would simply give out, succumbing to an illness that a healthier individual might have overcome. The end was often not quick or dignified, but a slow, painful decline. This common reality of a shorter lifespan and premature death is a grim but well-established historical fact for medieval commoners, including soldiers, and for those who had committed particularly brutal acts in war or who had survived through morally ambiguous means. There might be a deep sense of guilt or moral injury. Imagine the burden of living with the memories of atrocities committed, the lives taken, the destruction wrought. This internal conflict, in a deeply religious society that emphasized sin and redemption, would add another layer of spiritual torment to their already burdened lives. With only the church offering a path to absolution, often at a steep price. So, as you slowly succumb to the gentle pull of sleep, imagine the constant pain, the haunting memories, the grinding poverty, and the pervasive sense of neglect that define the miserable end of a medieval soldier. For all their bravery and sacrifice, their lives were ultimately consumed by the brutal realities of war, leaving them with little but suffering and an undignified decline. Your comfortable, secure, and healthy retirement today, with access to medical care and social support, is an unimaginable paradise compared to the bleak reality that awaited many who served on the battlefields of the Middle Ages. You have traveled through the harsh realities of the life of a medieval soldier, a life of hardship, danger, and often ending in misery. We have explored the relentless marches, the squalor of barrack life, the burden of armor and weapons, the chaos and brutality of the battlefield, the agonizing wounds, rampant disease, and poor medicine. You have witnessed sieges, food shortages, pay fraud, brutal punishments, and the horrors of capture. In the end, you have seen the permanent scars on body and mind that led to a lonely and miserable end. As you drift off to sleep, imagine a world where glory is often overshadowed by brutal reality, where soldiers, heroes for a moment, become forgotten victims of war. Tonight, you have seen a side of history that is not rosy, where the price of war is paid in blood, sweat, and endless suffering.